At the beginning of the story, Xiao Lin woke up with severe dizziness. The incessant noise around him only made it worse. He frowned, wondering why it was so loud in here, and looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. All he could see was a huge hall filled with strangers. As his vision gradually adjusted, he realized how colossal this place was. He couldn't figure out who all these people were, but he knew this definitely wasn't his bedroom. Had he been kidnapped? Or was this a dream? Then something stirred in his memory. He pressed his hand to his head. When the memories surfaced, I remembered that it all started with a letter. Xiao Lin had recently graduated from college. Instead of getting a regular job, he spent all his time playing games under the nickname God Xiao, becoming famous for turning matches around at the last second, like some kind of miracle worker. His fans loved it, the total control, the timing, the almost smug confidence in his actions. Until he found something more stable, he made a living boosting gaming accounts. Having finished another match and declared that he had had enough for today, he stretched in his cluttered room. His life was simple. Snacks within arm's reach, a phone always nearby, and endless gaming sessions. His father, however, was unimpressed. Furious, he declared he couldn't believe he had raised such a son. Wanting to prove he wasn't so useless, Xiao Lin moved out. But less than 2 days after moving in, everything went wrong. Late one night, there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, he saw a courier who looked suspiciously out of place. The man smirked and handed the package to the protagonist. The moment Xiao Lin opened it, black energy burst out from it. A glowing system screen appeared, informing him that he had been accepted into the Dawn Academy as a preparatory course student. He confirmed his identity and announced that forced teleportation would now begin. Before he could react, the letter was gone, and he realized he had been drawn into something he definitely hadn't signed up for. Suddenly, someone spoke nearby. A tall man with a scar across his face looked down at him and noticed that he had finally woken up. He added that Xiao Lin must have been in a rather weak body if he had lain there for more than 3 hours, and asked if he had intended to sleep forever. The other students around them were equally confused. Some demanded to know where they were, while others shouted that they were being kidnapped and threatened to call the police. The noise quickly got out of control. The scarred man looked fed up. He clicked his tongue and grabbed his sword. In one swift motion, he drew it open, and a flash of purple energy roared forward, sending a shockwave throughout the entire hall. The first-year students scattered in panic when he barked at them to be quiet. The sight was more than enough to silence everyone. He looked at the crowd with obvious irritation, muttering that every set seemed to have shots like this. And then he complained to the HR department, saying that they must be twiddling their thumbs all day. He announced that since someone had woken up late and wasted their time, he would be brief. Xiao Lin could only stare at him in shock. The scarred bastard finally introduced himself, saying that his name was Qin Chuan, and that he was the supervisor of the first-year 7th grade class. He told the crowd that they were the chosen ones, brought here to undergo intensive training, build strength, toughen up, and even become immortal. Before anyone could ask a question, he interrupted them, telling them to get their IDs out because the potential assessment was about to begin. Xiao Lin watched silently, already considering the situation. Counting himself, there were at least 200 people here, making it clear this wasn't a simple kidnapping. And now they were nowhere to be found. He then watched as the first student stepped into the glowing capsule. Xiao Lin judged it to be a game. The machine beeped and a completion message appeared on the screen. Qin Chuan glanced at the result and immediately dismissed it, declaring that a total of 24 points in stats was rubbish, and ordered the next person to pass. The next student fared a little better. Qin Chuan admitted that 32 points looked good and even showed a hint of excitement, but it quickly vanished. After all, the overall average was still too low, and only 1 or 2 people deserved attention. He should have contacted the director and HR. When it was Xiao Lin's turn, he stepped into the capsule and the machine started beeping, but the beeping did not stop. The seconds ticked by, one after another. While everyone else was down in less than 10 seconds, he stood there for almost a minute. Even Qin Chuan began to watch more closely, clearly expecting something unusual. Finally, the machine beeped loudly, signaling completion. Xiao Lin exhaled, thinking it was all over. Qin Chuan called him over to check the results, and the moment he saw the screen, his expression changed completely. The system displayed: name, Xiao Lin, strength, 2, dexterity, 2, intelligence, 2, constitution, 3. Qin Chuan stared at the screen and then at the protagonist, and with a look of pity and disgust on his face, He muttered that the total was 9. He covered his eyes with his hands, adding that he hadn't seen such terrible characteristics since his own early days at Dawn Academy. He turned to Xiao Lin and called him a rare piece of trash. Xiao Lin felt anger boiling up. He should have been sent home. Qingquan just sighed, disappointed that his fleeting anticipation turned into a meeting with the one, whom he called a true loser. Standing there, Xiao Lin heard the word echo in his mind. It brought back memories of how his family looked down on him. From childhood until now, wherever he went, he was always branded the same. A faint purple glow flickered in his eyes as he wondered if he really couldn't escape that nickname, even here. Qinchuan picked up the golden name badge and declared that with such characteristics, going to the test would be suicide, and giving him the token would be a waste. The main character merely held up his hand. And just like that, Xiao Lin snatched his token from the hands of the Academy's most formidable instructor. He straightened up and said that the question of whether he was a loser or not was not decided by one number, adding that in any case, he would try to do it himself. Qinchuan smirked and replied that he would wait and see how reality hit him, warning him not to lose his composure during the test. When he turned away, one of the girls asked about the gifted students he had mentioned earlier. Qinchuan gave a short laugh and explained that they were the lucky ones who were guided by fate itself, guaranteed survivors in the new world, and those destined to become strong. He told the rest of the class to focus on passing at least the entrance exam first. The black-haired girl spoke again, reminding him that he had promised them the opportunity to gain unimaginable wealth and power at the academy. She adjusted her glasses and asked what price they would have to pay for all these promises. Her tone was calm and confident. Even Qinchuan had to pause and glance at his notes. After asking her name, he read it aloud. Gu Xiaoya, and added that she had the highest starting stats in the group, though he added a wisecrack that she didn't have much talent. This time, he gave an answer. He explained that credits and atonement points were the Academy's main currency, which could be exchanged for strength, wealth, and power if one had the funds. Gu Xiaoya replied that she understood. Xiao Lin's eyes widened in astonishment. He never expected that this quiet girl would be the strongest here, and Qinchuan's attitude towards her had completely changed. Qinchuan then turned to the rest of the group and threw aside politeness, stating that if they wanted to check their status, they just needed to say the characteristics. Xiao Lin picked up his token and followed the instructions. A soft beep was heard. Xiao Lin stood frozen in front of the screen, terrified, his balance at 0 and his stats at F-. But the worst part was, of his remaining 60 years of life, every death at the academy would take away a full 10. The rest panicked. Some had little time left to live, while others realized that even one death would be the end. Some denied it all, dismissing it as delusional. As Xiao Lin was trying to comprehend this, a double beep suddenly sounded in his ears. A new system window popped up. It informed him that an abnormal fluctuation had been detected and that a hidden talent was being unlocked. It caught him off guard. Looking around, he noticed that no one else was reacting, from which it became clear that the notification was intended exclusively for him. The system started the analysis, although some parameters were defined as unknown. Training efficiency increased already at level 1, thanks to a passive effect, and an active effect allowed the player to copy any F-rank skill, excluding talents, for 3 minutes per week. The system failed to recognize this talent and suggested giving it a name. Xiao Lin thought for a moment. He was improving the training and allowing copying. It was all quite simple. He decided to keep things simple and chose the name Academic Genius. The system accepted the name. Purple energy flared around him as the name was processed. The screen refreshed. The talent name was Academic Genius, level 1. Then the rank evaluation began. The energy condensed and the result appeared. SS rank talent. Xiao Lin stared at the screen, realizing how far this rank was above the norm. This also meant that Qinchuan had not noticed him earlier during the inspection and was simply shouting at the other students. Xiao Lin's expression turned into a light, confident grin. He thought that the SS class talent, this was exactly what he needed to survive here. The stigma of failure no longer seemed so final. In his thoughts, God Xiao was back in the game. The panicked student, who had only 9 years left to live, frantically calculated the risks, wondering if his first death would reset his counter, and hoping that it was all just a bug in the system. Qinchuan didn't bother with gentle explanations. Instead, he slapped the guy over the head and called him an idiot. making it perfectly clear that, yes, with 9 years remaining, the first death meant final death. But then he suddenly called everyone fools for considering this bad news. He explained that outside the academy, people lose years of their lives every year simply by living. And once they die, it's over. No second chances. But here, life expectancy was not just a countdown, but a resource. A currency that could be recovered. By completing missions and exchanging points, they could increase their strength and restore lost years. He pointed out that power, knowledge, wealth, and longevity were now within reach. Theoretically, with enough credits, even eternal life was possible. Gu Xiaoya adjusted her glasses and asked if this rule applied everywhere or only within the academy. Qing Quan replied that once they became students, this rule would apply as long as they were on Earth. He then abruptly ended the discussion by announcing the start of the entrance examination and ordered everyone to remain in their places and not move. He snapped his fingers. The speakers immediately started humming, and a system notification appeared, announcing preparations for teleportation and the start of the countdown. The main character was also tense because he didn't know what to expect in the future. When the counter reached 0, a purple flame erupted throughout the hall, engulfing the students in a bright flash of light. In an instant, they vanished. Xinchuan was left standing alone in the now empty hall. He clicked his tongue and muttered that there wasn't a single talented student in this class, lamenting that his personal grade would probably suffer because of it. He rubbed his head, clearly irritated by his bad luck. Then a loud laugh echoed through the room. A man in a black t-shirt and camouflage pants walked in, casually puffing on a cigar. He greeted Xinchuan loudly and began to boast that his own class had produced 2 talented students, 1 A rank and 1 B rank. Xinchuan mentioned newcomers with stats above 40, but Kuriaga dismissed it. It's not the numbers that matter, but the talent. He recalled a rumor about a freshman from the land of the eagle who had achieved double S rank last year. Xinchuan laughed in response, claiming that this rumor had already been debunked, as no records of it were found in the central database. He added that even S-rank talents were extremely rare. Meanwhile, deep in the goblin nest, the air was thick with sticky green fog. The students reacted immediately. They started coughing and holding their noses, complaining about the terrible stench. Xiao Lin stood among them, noticeably less bothered by the smell, and instead focused on his system screen. The mandatory task was extremely simple. Escape the forest within 1 hour and reach a safe zone. There were also optional missions. To prepare them, the system distributed exclusive freshman welcome packs, each containing a random weapon. The news that the test was not fatal instantly turned the crowd's panic into excitement, as they learned that death, this time, would not entail any consequences. Xiao Lin opened his gift pack and received a beginner's staff with an F-rank magic rating. It came with a skill called Energy Ball, which consumed mental energy. He noted to himself that the system was very similar to the games he had played before. Skills, stats, progression, everything matched perfectly. So he already knew what to do. Clutching the staff tightly, he watched as a faint purple energy began to accumulate on the crystal tip. Xiao Lin decided to try out the new weapon and released a clot of purple energy from the crystal pommel. The charge crashed into the ground, leaving behind a small smoking crater. A system notification popped up, informing him that his basic wand mastery had gained 2 experience points, raising the skill to level 1 with a 2% progression. He realized that using weapons gives experience, and thanks to his SS talent for learning, he will be able to level up any skills colossally faster than others. But then, harsh reality kicked in. A sharp pain pierced his head, forcing him to grit his teeth. He realized that his stats were too low, his mana reserves were negligible, and he would not be able to maintain such a pace of casting. A nearby muscle man was madly swinging his blade, bragging about unlocking basic heavy sword mastery for the experience per swing. Xiao Lin realized the connection between the skill and the weapon and imagined the possibility of endless grinding right here, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Random swings were ineffective and drained too much stamina, and the mission's time limit ruled out such grinding. He concluded that switching to physical weapons might be the best choice for now. Just then, someone approached him. Gu Xiaoya spoke up, asking if he wanted to swap weapons. She admitted that she doesn't really know much about games, but she understands that magic comes at a price, probably related to mental strength or intellect. She felt the wand suited her better, and hinted that Xiao Lin might need something more practical and simple. Xiao Lin introduced himself, and they agreed to exchange weapons. The main character handed over the staff and received a novice's dagger in return. Then he tested the dagger with a quick swing and found it much more comfortable to handle. He also realized that having a partner would make the test much smoother. The guy turned back to Gu Xiaoya and was about to ask if she wanted to join a team. Before he could finish speaking, a loud voice interrupted them. Wang Dalin intervened, confidently offering cooperation, but exclusively to Gu Xiaoya. He completely ignored Xiao Lin, boasting that his strength, physique, and agility were all over 10 points. He asked if he didn't look like a much safer choice than the one he described as the pretty boy standing next to him. Xiao Lin muttered under his breath that high stats weren't everything. Gu Xiaoya sized up Wang Dalin, after which she calmly replied that she was not interested and walked away. The surrounding students reacted immediately, ridiculing the unsuccessful suitor. Wang Dalin's face turned crimson, and he turned his head sharply, looking for the culprit. His attention quickly turned to Xiao Lin. The big guy came up to him and pushed him, demanding an answer, to which he stared. He complained that the sight of someone with unambiguous characteristics irritated him and accused Xiao Lin of being useless. Xiao Lin remained unperturbed and replied that passing the test depended on their own strength, advising Wang Dalin to save his energy instead of foolish fights. This only added fuel to the fire. Wang Dalin grabbed Xiao Lin by the collar and lifted him slightly, promising to show him what true ability looked like. Xiao Lin didn't resist. He chuckled softly and replied that he would most likely not have such an opportunity. A green clawed paw emerged from the shadows directly behind Wang Dalin. By the time he had time to react, it was too late. The goblin had soared into the air, aiming straight for his head. A green goblin with a long tongue rushed at him and slashed his chest, drawing blood, which made him swear loudly. However, he didn't fall. And noticing how the goblin was about to attack him a second time, grinding his teeth, he swung his massive blade and cut the creature in two. Breathing heavily, he wiped the sweat from his face and muttered that he had just almost died. He then pointed a finger at Xiao Lin, accusing him of inaction and gloating. He added spitefully that some lousy goblin wouldn't have been able to touch him anyway. This arrogance didn't last long. A strange noise came from behind the trees. He froze in confusion and turned his head, but only to see dozens of glowing yellow eyes staring at him from the darkness. The forest was more than just dangerous. It was packed to the brim with enemies. Heart-rending screams rang out as a whole pack of goblins rushed to attack. People screamed in panic, begging the creatures to stay away as they were dragged away, and tore them apart. The air was filled with chaos, and the flickering digital damage effects made the situation clear. Anyone who couldn't fight would die. Xiao Lin froze for a brief second as the full gravity of what was happening finally hit him. This wasn't a game. It all seemed too real. The smell and the pain. Not far away, Gu Xiaoya stood confidently in place with her staff, collected as always. But Xiao Lin realized how naive he had been before. There was no rebirth here. There was no reset button. The people around him weren't players. They were living targets, dying with every second. Someone suddenly shouted that goblins were not attacking inside the nearby cave. The crowd rushed towards her in a desperate attempt to escape, pushing and trampling each other just to get inside. Xiao Lin snuck inside with the others, taking a moment to catch his breath. But a glowing blue window appeared with a countdown, showing that there were just under 30 minutes left until the end of the protection. With such a safe zone, Xiao Lin knew he couldn't sit back. He pulled out his dagger, his gaze sharpened as he forced himself to think clearly. He couldn't just sit and wait for death. And then he began practicing his swings, striking the air again and again, concentrating on the form and force of his movements. The process was slow, but this proved his theory. Experience came only from correct movements and real effort. There were no shortcuts. Every swing had meaning. As time ticked on, the countdown ticked past the final minute. The surviving students began to panic again. Some complained that the mission was impossible. Others argued that ranged weapons were useless against fast enemies. The tension was rapidly rising. Gu Xiaoya, however, remained calm, watching Xiao Lin and his grind for level, experience, and skills from the sidelines. When he stopped to catch his breath, she spoke up, noticing that his activities were pointless. She calculated that achieving the second level of mastery under normal conditions would take about an hour, and they did not have that kind of time. Xiao Lin looked at her, acknowledging the accuracy of her deep analysis. She continued, claiming that it was impossible to reach the second level in the remaining time. But Xiao Lin only smiled faintly. He agreed that this was impossible under normal circumstances, but pointed out that his situation was not normal. He opened his status window, showing that his basic dagger proficiency was already at level 1, with 98 experience points out of 100. There was only one step left to the goal. And then, the main character turned to the girl and asked if she had managed to find out anything about the goblins. Gu Xiaoya looked genuinely surprised when she realized Xiao Lin had caught her spying on him. She asked how he knew. He dismissed it, comparing it to games where you read a guide before aggroing a mob. But the genius girl wasn't amused. She curtly replied that she didn't play, to which he merely nodded. The main character said these goblins were low-level trash, most likely standard F rank, but the girl decided to open up and told him where their weak spots were, the head and heart. She noted that if you overcome your fear, there is nothing difficult in one-on-one combat. Xiao Lin glanced at the rest of the group, most of whom were curled up in the fetal position and trembling. He mentally agreed that the mission wasn't difficult, but everyone was frozen with terror. Clutching his dagger, Xiao Lin announced the exit. Gu Xiaoya nodded. She couldn't run the entire mission. However, on their way out, a local tough guy in a black t-shirt blocked their path. He rudely asked where they were going. He completely ignored Xiao Lin and insistently suggested that Gu Xiaoya join his group. This boy would only be a burden to them. Gu Xiaoya calmly replied that reaching the safe zone required for the mission would be easy. The main challenge, and the biggest prize, lay in the Goblin King. The big guy countered that the Goblin King was just a side quest, and the creature hadn't even appeared. He lamented that they could fail survival, while she was thinking about a hidden mission. But the main character was convinced that since the quest existed, it could be completed. He began searching for a trigger, assuming it depended on time, the number of survivors, or the number of goblins killed. Gu Xiaoya expertly ruled out the time and number of students. The academy wouldn't have left them zero time to deal with the boss, and there were too few survivors for that to serve as a trigger. With a confident grin, the protagonist concluded that the most likely trigger was the kill counter. A frightened girl with a bow interrupted them, asking why they needed this boss at all. Couldn't they just complete the mandatory task and leave? Xiao Lin turned to the crowd and shouted that there was no penalty for failing the test, while winning would bring colossal profits. He asked them if they really expected to get another chance to earn credits with zero risk when the real school started. This logic began to sink in, and even the students, who were scared to death, began to realize that since they weren't going to die for real anyway, it was worth a try. The tough guy was still trying to act like he was the alpha. He smirked and asked if they were really going to listen to this skinny guy, and started flexing his glasses. Before he could finish bragging, Gu Xiaoya harshly rebuked him, reminding him of his 32 points, a result barely above that of an ordinary person. He flew into a rage, demanding to know just how high her own stats were. She adjusted her glasses and said the number 46 points, and pointing the staff at the bastard, she asked him to finally close his mouth after that. The silence that followed was deafening. The big guy looked like he'd swallowed a whole lemon, and Xiao Lin was inwardly stunned. He estimated that 46 points was almost 5 times his own score. This girl wasn't just smart, she was a leader, and commanded that everyone who wanted to pass the exam and get bonuses should henceforth obey her orders unquestioningly. She started handing out tasks. A tough guy with high stats was given the task of tanking enemies on the front lines, while the long-range fighters were supposed to cover them from behind. Then she turned her gaze to Xiao Lin, who by this point had already decided on his own responsibilities. He smiled slyly and volunteered to be a roamer for guerrilla raids and to wear down the enemy, promising to finish off wounded animals at low HP. Jumping into open combat with his stats would be suicide, and so the group moved forward, and the battle began instantly. The big guy roared and called for the creatures to die. He roared furiously, swinging his huge sword and smashing goblins left and right. Behind him, the archer pulled her bowstring to its limit and released an arrow. There was chaos all around. The monsters had emerged again and were preparing to attack. One of the goblins jumped on the girl archer, but Xiao Lin rushed out like a swift shadow. He intercepted the monster and, in an instant, cut it with his dagger, killing it instantly. The rescued girl timidly thanked him, but he had already completely switched to the next target. He mentally reminded himself that he needed to act strictly in this vein and not get involved in direct clashes. It was necessary to conserve strength and seize the ideal moments to deliver the final blow. This cold-blooded and calculating tactic paid off 100%. System messages about goblin deaths began pouring in before his eyes. One of the students watched in amazement as their loser struck the monster at its most vulnerable moment every time. Alpha refused to accept this, muttering under his breath that he was simply lucky. But Gu Xiaoya saw the true nature of this luck. It was as if the boy had already evaded the goblin's sight, even predicting his movements. Another beep sounded. Basic dagger mastery increased, and the current level became 2. Xiao Lin wiped some dirt from his face. He thought about how his gaming habits had finally turned into a life-saving skill. He'd been lucky enough to snag a set of fully immersive VR games and spent 2 months playing them like crazy. That's where all those skills came from. Suddenly, a sharp alarm interrupted his thoughts. The system window made an announcement. The database check was complete. He became the first freshman this year to level up a skill to level 2. His nerdiness paid off. The Academy gave him Heavy Strike Level 1 for free. Xiao Lin clenched his fist, a confident grin spreading across his face. He'd leveled up, gained a new skill, and was now down to 1 goblin to complete the side quest. He spotted his final target and rushed forward. He plunged his sword into the creature, and the system confirmed the kill. Secondary objective number 1 had been successfully completed. He sighed contentedly. But just as he began to relax, a strange static noise echoed through the clearing. The alpha boy stuttered and watched in confusion as the nearby goblin literally dissolved into digital pixels. It disappeared, and the man asked in confusion what had happened. The noise grew louder. A notification has been issued to everyone. The goblin population has been reduced by 1/3, and hidden conditions have been met. The boss has been activated. A shadow so huge that the trees seemed tiny against its backdrop began to loom over the battlefield. The Goblin King looked down at the tiny humans below him, assessing them from his height. Xiao Lin, unwavering as ever, didn't look away. He continued to stare intently at the towering figure. The Goblin King took a deep breath, his chest expanding, and then he let out a deafening, bone-shattering roar. A powerful sound wave rolled across the clearing, being so dense that it distorted the air. The archer, familiar from previous events, covered her ears with her hands, her face distorted in pain. And she screamed so loudly that her eardrums almost burst from the sound wave. Even our cool and clever protagonist, Gu Xiaoya, had to close his eyes from the terrible pressure of this scream. When the dust settled, a red system health bar flickered above the monster, and it was simply enormous. The dungeon boss is the Goblin King. This huge machine stood in place, steam whistling out of its fanged mouth. Our hero noticed that the small goblins had completely disappeared, leaving them alone with this big guy. The survivors began to lose their composure. One of the students stared at the monster in pure despair and screamed, asking if they were being mocked. Another guy decided he'd had enough of this super magic academy and yelled that he was leaving. Our protagonist extended his hand and shouted a warning for everyone to stay put. He realized something critical about the boss's mechanics and noted that these goblins had a specific trait. Their field of vision was tiny, but their sense of smell and hearing remained incredibly acute. The Goblin King's ear twitched, catching the sound of the student's running footsteps. His glowing yellow eye focused on the coward. Our hero winced, realizing that the student's actions had just painted a giant target on his back. Meanwhile, Wang Dalan was not ready to give up his status as leader. He yelled at the survivors, asking what the hell they were afraid of, and stated that there were so many of them that they could attack him in a crowd and finish him off. With a roar of his own, he leaped into the air, raising his massive blade high. He slashed with all his might, but the Goblin King didn't even flinch. The monster merely glanced at him blankly with one glowing eye, before delivering a casual, point-blank blow straight into Wang Dalan's stomach. The impact was brutal. The owner of top-tier stats was thrown back like a rag doll, and with a sickening thud, crashed into the monolithic stone wall. Blood splattered everywhere, and his body began to dissolve into blue pixels. The group's morale had officially hit rock bottom. Everyone started screaming for them to run. They were panicking, shouting that Wang Dalan had been taken out in one blow. The panic was contagious. One of the students screamed, trying to escape, but the Goblin King was faster. A huge green foot came down, crushing him into the mud. The boss went on a full-scale rampage, swinging his massive club and crushing yet another student like a bug. Then he turned his attention to another girl, who froze in horror when the shadow of the club fell on her. Suddenly, a purple lightning flashed through the air. Gu Xiaoya fired a bolt from her staff, but it only grazed the monster's arm. Its health bar barely budged. She bit her lip in frustration, bitterly noting that she had missed. She realized that targeting the limbs resulted in less damage. She believed they needed to target vulnerable spots. The beauty looked around, and according to her original plan, The others were supposed to hold off the Goblin King while she and the other ranged fighters dealt steady damage from the rear. She figured that as long as everyone worked together, they would be able to kill the boss before they ran out of mental energy. But now, she saw the survivors scattering in all directions, throwing down their weapons as they ran. As the formation disintegrated, her plan proved too idealistic. She was left standing alone, a tiny figure before a towering green mountain of muscle. Suddenly, a scream cut through her despair, asking if she was a fool. The voice furiously ordered her to run. Just as the Goblin King swung his massive club, Xiao Lin rushed into battle. He slipped right under the deadly blow. The club crashed into the ground behind him with a loud thud, splitting the soil and leaving a huge crater where he had stood just a second ago. He didn't just run. He calculated the situation. Deftly regaining his balance, he figured out the secret behind this green maniac's behavior. The Goblin King attacked the closest one first. He shouted to the archer hiding behind a tree not to panic, and ordered her to keep her distance and harass the creature from afar. The girl was clearly shocked, but promised to try, after which she pulled the bowstring. He then turned to Gu Xiaoya and said that since her attack power was high, she needed to find a way to gradually reduce the king's health. She nodded gravely in response and got to work. Their teamwork was finally starting to look quite respectable. Arrows flew through the air and purple magical bolts streaked across the sky, raining down on the boss. The girls screamed with joy, seeing that this tactic was bearing fruit. Xiao Lin also kept up their fighting spirit, urging them to keep up the good work. But of course, the Goblin King wasn't going to just take the blows without complaint. He let out a deafening roar, and then he slammed his massive fists together with force, releasing a glowing green shockwave that swept across the ground. Xiao Lin shouted for everyone to take care, but it was too late. The archer was caught in the shockwave and sent flying with a pained cry. Now the monster stood before them, and it seemed even the light in his eyes had gone out. When the dust settled, only Xiao Lin and Gu Xiaoya remained standing in front of the monster. Gu Xiaoya looked quite tense and asked Xiao Lin if the two of them had any chance at all at this stage. Our hero just looked at her calmly and asked if she had enough mana to release a few more energy blasts. She replied that she had a maximum of 2 shots left. Xiao Lin grinned and assured her that would be enough. Since headshots dealt massive damage, she only needed to hit the monster's head once. She expressed concern because the green giant was moving too fast, and its accuracy might not be enough. But our protagonist had a plan for that. With a confident grin, he declared that he would simply make him stop. The skill immediately activated. His eyes glowed a mysterious purple as the system scanned the monster, detecting his shockwave skill. It was an F-rank ability that dealt damage on impact and, more importantly, inflicted a 3-second stun. Xiao Lin slid forward, remembering how he had been called trash before because of his useless talent. But now it was finally his turn to shine on the battlefield. Another window popped up, confirming success. The shockwave skill had been copied. Xiao Lin rushed forward as the Goblin King prepared for his next move. Watching carefully, he realized that the monster was about to use the shockwave again. From what he understood, the monster required both hands to hit the ground to activate, while its copied version only required a weapon strike. Since he himself was much smaller, he judged that his attack would work faster, and the shockwave copy was activated. Xiao Lin lowered his sword just as the Goblin King slammed his massive hands down onto the ground. He had already guessed that such skills could be interrupted, and the collision immediately caused a furious burst of energy, knocking the Goblin King's arms back and stunning him. Xiao Lin slid across the ground and realized his guess had been correct. The Goblin King let out an angry roar. Xiao Lin reminded himself that he couldn't use this skill continuously, one after another, and he needed to wait for the reload. The system showed 22 seconds remaining, while the monster continued to attack without slowing down. Out of nowhere, a huge purple bolt of magic slammed straight into the Goblin King's chest. The monster let out a loud roar as its health bar began to drain. Gu Xiaoya leaned heavily on her staff. Gasping for breath, she warned that she only had enough strength for one attack. She genuinely couldn't understand how Xiao Lin, with his meager stats, had managed to disrupt the Goblin King's cast. The system displayed a 16-second recharge timer. The Goblin King ripped a huge boulder from the ground. Xiao Lin looked at this and realized that he was now a hair's breadth from death. He wouldn't be able to avoid the next blow. With a slight grin, he decided that he wouldn't even try to dodge. The Goblin King's fist slammed down, and Xiao Lin raised his hand to block it head-on. Gu Xiaoya shouted his name as the impact raised a huge cloud of dust mixed with blue pixel energy. When everything became clear, Xiao Lin was still standing next to the goblin. His hand was glowing with that same blue light, and he shouted to her that he was okay. The system countdown dropped to 10 seconds. The Goblin King raised his hands again, preparing another strike. When the timer reached 7 seconds, Xiao Lin stepped right under the monster. Realizing that his skill wouldn't work from too far away, he jumped at the 3-second mark, looking at his sword and going over his entire plan in his head again. He yelled at the monster to stop just as the system indicated it was recharging. The shockwave was activated, and his impact erupted into a powerful purple explosion. He shouted at Gu Xiaoya, telling her to take advantage of this chance. She didn't hesitate for a second and released her last powerful purple beam from her staff. The attack rushed forward and passed straight through the Goblin King's head, completely destroying the remaining health of his body. The Goblin King's body began to disintegrate into blue pixels. A system message announced that he had been killed, after which Xiao Lin lowered his sword, trying to even out his breathing. He said they had finally defeated him, but immediately after that, his legs gave way. He collapsed forward onto the grass, muttering that this assignment was supposed to be just a safe zone mission. Gu Xiaoya hurried over and looked down at him, clearly worried. As the light around him began to fade, a final thought flashed through his mind. It looked like he wouldn't be able to complete the mission. The scene immediately shifted to a stylish, high-tech conference room. Several people around the table were discussing the results, and one of them asked if everyone had already checked the freshman entrance test results in their classes. At the head of the table sat the Minister of Student Admissions, smoking a cigarette, who announced that he would now give everyone a brief summary. He explained that 1,360 students were enrolled in 12 classes. The ranks were 560 were F, 450 were D, 200 were C, 83 were B, and 52 were A. After a pause, he added that 15 students received the highest S rank. This sparked a heated discussion. One woman looked stunned, while a man remarked that S rank meant completing all 3 missions and surviving. He was amazed at how many new talents were in this stream. The muscular man declared that there were 2 talented students in his class. The blonde added that she had 2 of her own, even though they only received B ranks. The minister confirmed that there were 13 talented students among the first-year students. Stubbing out his cigarette, he stated that this was the strongest influx in the last 10 years and thanked everyone for their work. Our hero's mentor, Qian, propped his head up with his hand and, sadly, noted that his class had not produced a single talented student. The minister replied that even though his class hadn't made it to the safe zone, they'd still set 2 academy records. Qin looked up in surprise. The minister explained that, firstly, in one class, 2 students without innate talent simultaneously received an S grade. He then added that one of them had broken the record for the highest IQ since the founding of Dawn Academy. The room fell silent as he announced that the record for lowest overall stats had also been broken. He pointed out that both of these opposing records belonged to 2 S-ranked students from Qin's class. The stat chart that appeared showed Gu Xiaoya's intelligence off the chart, while Xiao Lin's were at rock bottom. The minister added that this situation had even caught the director's attention. A system notification popped up. The next moment, Xiao Lin found himself in a pristine white corridor. He looked at his hands and whispered that he had indeed made it, noticing that all his wounds had disappeared without a trace. A system screen with his personal data appeared before him. Xiao Lin stared at the screen in confusion. He realized he had no memory of completing the first mission, having lost consciousness beforehand. Reaching out to the screen, he noticed Gu Xiaoya walking away in the distance and wondered if it was she who had dragged him to the safe zone. Someone called his name. He turned and saw an archer running toward him, waving her hand in greeting. She thanked him and Gu Xiaoya, admitting that without them, she would never have received an A grade. A little disappointed, she called herself useless, having been knocked out by a simple shockwave from the boss. Then she asked if they had managed to defeat the Goblin King in the end. Xiao Lin smiled slightly and confirmed that they had succeeded. The girl beamed and exclaimed that she knew they could do it. Just at that moment, the big guy approached Xiao Lin and spoke to him. He grumbled that it was all pure luck and added that with such characteristics, without Gu Xiaoya, he would have been lost. Soon, Gu Xiaoya herself approached, looking as calm as always in her long coat. She stopped right in front of Xiao Lin, called him by name, and said that she wanted to talk to him alone about the recent battle. Xiao Lin and Gu Xiaoya stood together in the quiet corridor after everything had finally calmed down. Xiao Lin thanked her for her help during the safe zone mission, but Gu Xiaoya simply responded by calling it a mutual effort to achieve maximum reward. She adjusted her glasses and added that if Xiao Lin hadn't intervened to interrupt the Goblin King's skill and create that gap in the defense, she wouldn't have been able to deliver the finishing blow. Xiao Lin listened to her, mentally noting how calmly and clearly she analyzed what had happened. Then she brought up another topic. The girl noted that, judging by his current stats, it should have been impossible for him to interrupt the boss's skill from the start. However, she assured him that everyone had their own secrets, and she had no plans to pry into his. The girl promised to keep everything a secret, and Xiao Lin thanked her, lightly scratching the back of his head. Gu Xiaoya then mentioned that the smart brain system in their name tags had a communication function, and suggested that they add each other as friends. Xiao Lin agreed, and she told him to mentally recite the code word to bring up the interface. When he did so, a screen appeared in front of him with basic information: his name, student ID number, credits, and points. All his stats were low. Gu Xiaoya asked for his student number, and he gave it to her. Almost immediately, a notification popped up, saying he had received a friend request from her. Xiao Lin accepted it, and the system confirmed that they were now connected. At that moment, Qin Chuan's voice rang out, calling for all F-ranked students to immediately gather at the entrance. He then instructed everyone else to open their cards in the Smart Brain and head to the central platform. As the crowd began to move, Qin Chuan called Gu Xiaoya over, saying that he wanted to talk to her. She agreed and followed him, leaving Xiao Lin alone. Xiao Lin opened the map and saw that the route to the site was through the courtyard. As he watched Gu Xiaoya leave, he wondered if Qin Chuan was interested in her because of her S rank, or if he had noticed something more. Later, a huge crowd of students had already gathered on the central platform under a clear blue sky. Xiao Lin looked around and wondered what such a sight would look like in the real world, where so many people suddenly disappeared. Gu Xiaoya approached him and asked if everything was okay with him, and also confirmed that she had not said anything unnecessary. Suddenly, shouts were heard calling for everyone to move aside and make way. A blue-haired young man in a student council uniform walked through the crowd. The inspector followed him and ordered the students to line up according to their classes. The young man walked up to the podium, above which a blue crystal hovered in the air. He introduced himself as the student council president and explained that the principal was running late but would arrive later. He also added that he would welcome the first-year students on behalf of the entire academy. Before he could continue, a deep, chilling roar shook the entire area. Xiao Lin and the other students looked up in shock. A massive dragon with glowing purple eyes appeared above them, whose enormous body cast a shadow over the entire area and the people. Xiao Lin instantly felt a colossal pressure, sweating and trying to comprehend the sight of a real dragon descending right in front of them. A huge purple dragon let out a roar that shook the entire area as it hovered above the students' heads. Xiao Lin stood motionless, sweat pouring down his face as he realized that his body was completely paralyzed by primal instinct. Not far from him, Gu Xiaoya was also trembling, mentally admitting that she was completely unable to move. The dragon descended smoothly and landed near the podium, where the student council president and teachers were waiting for him. On the lizard's head sat an old man with gray hair and a long beard. He dismounted from his dragon and casually apologized to the students for being late, explaining that he had business to attend to. The student council president gave a tight smile and remarked that the entrance ceremony had been a bit too grand. The director objected, saying it wasn't the pontoons. He explained that he was terribly late arriving from another location, so he simply had no choice but to ride the dragon. While the director chatted, the irritated dragon shifted from paw to paw. The old man scolded the lizard for frightening the students and threatened to use it as upholstery for the sofa. Xiao Lin watched and thought that this director was the only one who could see his talent as a student. Then the director mentioned that he had already looked at the results of the entrance test and called the current flow quite impressive. His gaze slid over the crowd, piercing and focused, causing Xiao Lin to tense up. A purple magic circle flashed on the ground, activating a sound amplification spell. The director added formally that he usually begins with an introduction, but right now the students have other concerns. Many were brought here under murky circumstances, and they're clearly not happy. He pointed to the side and advised anyone who had complaints to voice them to the admissions committee, adding that they had a bad habit of delivering letters at the most inopportune times. He even promised to introduce a new rule, only enrolling people during the day. A whole range of emotions were reflected on the crowd's faces at that moment. The director's tone changed. Declaring that the jokes were over, he promised to answer the two main questions on everyone's mind: who they were and why they had gathered here. Surrounded by swirling purple energy, he called on the students from the old world to listen carefully. In a firm voice, he proclaims that from now on, they were all colonizers. He explained that this place was the planet Norma, or New World. The purpose of the Dawn Academy was to train first-class pioneer colonists. He made it perfectly clear. Norma was the world they were heading to, the place for their future battles, and the territory they would one day completely subjugate. The director then announced to the students that their normal life had ended the moment they opened their invitation letters. According to him, something far more grandiose lay ahead. Some of them could grow into military commanders, leading armies to conquer new lands, while others could become powerful magicians who revealed the secrets of the universe and subjugated the laws of nature. The old man even mentioned that some would rise high enough to personally set the rules for a whole new world. Gesturing to the dragon behind them, he promised them strength, knowledge, power, and a chance at immortality. He assured them that everything the new world offered would be within their reach. Then he introduced a new rule. He explained that freshmen had always been strictly forbidden from leaving for the new world early, but this time everything was going to change. The principal announced that the top 3 students based on their semester exam results would be the first to fly there. This caused a stir. The head of the student council stepped forward, nervous about the risk it presented to them. The director didn't let him continue, cutting him off mid-sentence with a single piercing glance. The president immediately backed down and, covered in sweat, quickly corrected himself, admitting that he had spoken out of turn. The satisfied director concluded the meeting. Xiao Lin watched the proceedings attentively. Noticing the president's heated reaction, he began to wonder if there were hidden risks. But he didn't dwell on it, deciding simply to squeeze the maximum out of the academy to develop his powers. Just as he was about to leave, instructor Qin Chuan called out to him and told him to stay. Xiao Lin turned around, and Qin explained that according to the academy's rules, the person who scored the highest on the entrance test automatically became the class president. Since Gu Xiaoya had refused the position, the role had now passed to him. Qin added that being a village elder grants credits, better access to resources, and privileges. This will be of tremendous help to those at the very bottom of the rankings. The teacher added that the position would be reassigned 3 months after the exam. And then Xiao Lin was suddenly confronted with a message about his appointment as class monitor for the 7th grade. Xin told him to read the additional manual sent by the smart brain before leaving. On the way to the dormitory, Xiao Lin kept thinking about what really lay behind the concept of privilege. And so he arrived at the dorm. At the reception desk, a second-year student explained the dorm rules to him. She warned him that the doors would close at 7 p.m. and open at 6 a.m. She also sternly added that he would be mercilessly charged for spending the night outside the dorm. Xiao Lin nodded in understanding, accepting the information. But as soon as the girl checked his student ID, her whole attitude instantly changed. She looked surprised and flustered when she realized it was the class president standing in front of her. When Xiao Lin tried to say that he was forced, she waved him off, declaring that a mere student wouldn't get such a role. The girl introduced herself as Zhang Tingting, and enthusiastically volunteered to help her gather supplies and choose a room. As she handed over the green uniforms, she noticed that the second-year students wore blue and the first-year students wore green, and began to chat more casually. She escorted him to his private room, a private apartment reserved exclusively for prefects, while ordinary first-years shared quarters. Xiao Lin surveyed the space, pleasantly impressed. Zhang Tingting reminded students not to lose their name tags under any circumstances, as they are needed for entering the dormitory, making purchases, and registering for classes. Before leaving, she added him as a friend and said that he could ask her about anything related to academic life. She waved goodbye, reminding him, in the end, about the need to choose his courses carefully. Left alone, Xiao Lin began to clearly understand how much personal power influenced social status here. He did not waste any time and decided to immediately sort out the choice of academic subjects. He gave the command to open the course selection table, and a huge list unfolded before his eyes. There were basic courses: fencing, saber, boxing, archery, meditation, plus secondary ones: taijutsu, balance, dodging, and theory, the history, language, geography of Norma. The choice was overwhelming, but Xiao Lin pulled himself together in time. He knew that theory was essential, and that combat required choosing only one primary focus and 3 secondary ones. He relied on his students' talent to compensate for his weaker stats. After weighing everything, he decided to make the most of this advantage, as his talent greatly accelerated his learning. He ended up choosing basic swordsmanship for flexibility, basic taijutsu for close combat survival, and basic meditation for concentration. As soon as he confirmed his choice, a blue screen flashed, indicating that the selection process had been successfully completed. The next day, Xiao Lin showed up at the training ground to practice fencing. He diligently struck the wooden training post with his sword, putting force into each thrust. His experience with the sword increased. Through practice, he realized that the power of a chopping strike comes from the waist, not just the wrist. Once he grasped this essence, his hidden talent was activated. His learning efficiency doubled. His movements became more precise and faster. Soon, his sword skill reached level 3, and he personally witnessed that he was moving forward at almost twice his normal speed. Nearby, another student collapsed to the ground, exhausted, complaining that his arms could no longer bear the strain. Watching this scene, instructor Zheng Na dryly remarked that this year's freshmen were even worse than she had expected. She then sternly warned those present that no one would be allowed to leave the area until they raised their fencing to level 3. One of the students began to lament that choosing her class in the first place had been a mistake, and grumbled that she had been too harsh. The others supported him, pointing out that it usually took at least 3 hours just to crawl to the second level. Amidst all the noise, Xiao Lin called out loudly to Zheng Na, attracting her attention. He reported to her that his swordsmanship had already reached the 3rd level, and asked if he could leave early. Hearing this, Zheng Na stared straight at him, clearly not believing a single word. She sternly asked if he was joking with her. After all, it was only the first day of training, and the lesson only lasted 2 hours. At the training arena, Chun-Na called out to Xiao Lin, calling him the lucky one with unambiguous characteristics who rode at the team's expense to achieve S rank. She said that if he wanted to skip class, he should have come up with a better excuse, and made it clear that she didn't believe he could reach level 3 so quickly. Xiao Lin remained calm and told her that the data panel could confirm this, and even suggested that she check it herself. Chun-Na sneered dismissively, stating that there was no need to look at the boring data. Suddenly, a warning flashed. Teacher Chun-Na had activated her high-level teaching privileges. Blue codes distorted the air, signaling the opening of the simulation arena, urging the students to prepare. Xiao Lin looked around. The training ground was disappearing. In its place was a dark, empty wasteland littered with skulls and bones. Chun-Na now stood in dark armor that looked like it was made of bone. She snapped. Instead of staring at numbers, it was much wiser to test everything in real combat. A system message popped up, welcoming them to a system-wide combat simulation arena. They stood next to the remains of a massive skeleton, while Chun-Na explained that the academy had abolished the original rules of the ordinary world and invested enormous resources into creating this training space. She came closer and told him that, although he would not actually die here, everything he felt, including the pain, would be absolutely real. She added that opening this arena cost her a lot of exchange points. With a simple wave of his hand, one by one, armored skeletal warriors began to emerge from the ground. Chun-Na told the little one to prove his 3rd level of swordsmanship in a real fight, noting that these skeletons were about as strong as the goblins from the entrance exam. Then she sat down on the bone throne, watching him with an amused smile. She added that if he managed to clear this dungeon, she would allow him to leave early not only today, but in the future as well. Just then, a heavy blade swung towards Xiao Lin. He dodged it just in time as the system interface appeared. The undead dungeon opened up, and to clear it, he could either hold out for 40 minutes or defeat 20 skeleton warriors. Xiao Lin pursed his lips, thinking that opening something like this just to check the level of a freshman was completely over the top. Another notification appeared, informing him that he had received a high-quality iron dagger with low physical attack. He gripped his sword tighter. Sweat broke out on his face as he realized his options. Either hold out or fight his way through. He decided not to lose heart and fight. He rushed forward and hit the skeleton on the neck. The system updated his progress, showing that 1 enemy out of 20 had been defeated. And finally, the monster's head flew off from the protagonist's blow. As he moved, he calculated everything in his mind. If he aimed for weak spots, it would take about 2 hits per skeleton, which meant about 40 accurate hits to finish them all off. Having prepared himself, he moved toward the center of the group. From her bone throne, Chun-Na watched the proceedings intently. She hadn't expected this. She expected him to panic, apologize, and ask her to shut everything down immediately. Instead, He charged straight into the fray. As she continued to watch, she admitted to herself that his movements were in fact confident. His steps, the way he distributed his power, and the angle of his punches all looked properly trained. This left a strong impression on her. She acknowledged that he was better than the others, but also noted that his base stats were still quite low. Then she realized that he had chosen fencing and meditation classes precisely to improve these indicators. Even with such weak stats, Xiao Lin had already defeated 13 skeletons single-handedly. For Chun Na, this alone was impressive. The timer showed 28 minutes remaining, but his stamina was starting to wane, and he ended up getting hit in the back by one of the skeletons. Seeing this, Chun Na said that was enough and told him to face the truth, adding that there was no way he could win like that. She told him to give up and follow her instructions, but Xiao Lin remained on his feet, still ready to continue. At that moment, a new skill was activated in his system called Heavy Slash. With one swing, he took out several skeletons at once, increasing his score to 16. Chun Na reacted with surprise and wondered how he suddenly acquired such a skill. Xiao Lin continued to advance. He used this attack again and cleared out the remaining enemies one by one until all 20 skeletons were defeated. When the last one fell, the test was over. Breathing heavily, he looked towards Chun Na, who had already risen from her bone throne. With a tired smile, he told her that he had fulfilled the requirement she had set at the beginning of the lesson. Hearing this, Chun Na began to wonder if perhaps the freshman's promotion to S rank wasn't just luck after all. But Xiao Lin had already fallen to the ground, exhausted. The scene shifted. Far away in the conference room, the president sat casually signing papers, as if nothing had happened. The assistant nervously pointed out to him that he should review the lesson schedule, but he didn't immediately understand. Then the girl pointed out that the newcomer's schedule was absolutely absurd and showed him the screen. The president took one look and couldn't believe his eyes. Xiao Lin had literally chosen every single available activity. Later, in the infirmary, Instructor Nana had a heated argument with the president. She sounded irritated, asking if this dude really thought her occupation had gone too far. The president remained calm, saying that the complaint was only filed because the students were still green first-year students. Instructor Nana turned away and essentially declared that being tough now was the only way to keep them alive in the future. The president didn't argue. He clearly understood her point of view, harsh as it was. Instructor Nana sighed, throwing her hair back, as if she was already tired of this boring bickering. Then a groan came from the bed. They both looked there. As Xiao Lin slowly came to his senses after this brutal virtual beating, he blinked several times, trying to figure out where he was. Looking around and catching the sharp smell of medicine, he realized that he was in the school infirmary. The president greeted him warmly, explaining that the mental exhaustion of the simulation could take a heavy toll on a person even outside the game. Xiao Lin stretched a little and noticed only mild discomfort, which frankly surprised him. The treatment here was no joke. The president smiled, noting that the speed of Xiao Lin's recovery was somewhat insane. The president ordered Instructor Nana to leave the room immediately. She stamped her foot and complained that he had seriously abused his power, sounding clearly annoyed. Then she turned away and walked down the corridor. However, suddenly he stopped abruptly. She turned around and shouted at Xiao Lin as if he was just another brat. Pointing directly at him, she declared that she kept her promises, so from now on, he was free to leave her classes early. Then she added the warning, asking if he was trying to train both styles at the same time. That was a bad idea. A complete disaster that was bound to happen. The door slammed shut again, this time for good. Left alone with the president, Xiao Lin quietly thought that perhaps Instructor Nana wasn't as bad as everyone said. The president cleared his throat and got straight to the point, and the questions. He asked if Xiao Lin had seriously not read the manual, since recruiting so many classes, according to him, was just plain stupidity. He brought two clear paths to the screen: physical and magical evolution. Two different systems. He explained that mixing both directions would disrupt concentration and would slow down the whole process. That's why, as a newbie, he shouldn't have thought about it. Xiao Lin admitted he already knew this. Sure, learning to do a little bit of everything early on could help in battles, but in the long run, this required much more time and effort. In his mind's eye, he could already see his skill tree branching out in all sorts of complex directions. He confirmed that he understood all the risks before making his choice. Clutching the sheet beneath him, he made it clear he had the courage to see it through. The president sighed, realizing that this guy wasn't going to change his mind anytime soon. Then suddenly a notice popped up. It was from the director. The president frowned as he read, clearly at a loss. Standing up, He told Xiao Lin that the old man himself had approved of this crazy schedule. However, he added that it would be adjusted so that Xiao Lin would not burn out completely on the second day. Left alone in the infirmary, Xiao Lin felt that this old man was watching him much more closely than he let on. The scene shifted. At the very top of the academy, sunlight flooded the director's office. The old man stood there with his back to everything, simply gazing into the distance and thinking about the chaos the new students were already causing. Then a ghost-like girl floated into the room, smiling brightly. She asked why he looked so serious. The director pointed at her and blamed the system for having watched too much anime recently, adding that almost no one even suspected that an AI like her existed. AI complained like a bored child, saying that she had been stuck with nothing to do for ages. Then she playfully asked if he wasn't interested in that high-scoring freshman. The director frowned and opened Xiao Lin's personal file, calling his characteristics, frankly, pathetic. He said the academy typically only accepted students with at least double those numbers. There is no way in the world such a person could have ended up here by accident. Hovering nearby, the AI reported that it had checked the old records and found something strange. She explained that there was no data about Xiao Lin in the central system at all. She then showed him the figures, explaining that 1,360 people had been accepted, but there were only 1,359 enrollment records. The director frowned. She mentioned that such a system error had never happened before. The director immediately told her to pick up Xiao Lin's admission letter so that he could check it. She refused. Just like that. The grandfather was simply in shock, and the girl was spinning around, laughing at his reaction. She said that even she didn't have access to it because it was heavily encrypted. That's when it really dawned on him. This situation was much deeper than it appeared from the outside. After a long sigh, the director decided to leave the matter for now and keep everything under wraps. There was no point in causing a panic over something so strange. The holographic girl agreed to the plan and hid the damaged file without hesitation. The headmaster then cast a protective spell and ordered all remaining acceptance letters to be secured immediately. The system carried out his command, blocking the newcomer's data to prevent anything like this from happening again. In a slightly teasing tone, the girl noted that he was clearly worried that someone might reveal the truth behind these letters. The old man just smiled slightly and waved it off, saying that he was returning to their planet the next day. He made it clear that he didn't want anyone to interfere with Xiao Lin's development. After that, he left all affairs at the academy in the care of the AI and flew away. The next day, the academy's cafeteria was crowded. Rows of trays neatly lined up as students shoveled food into their mouths. At one of the tables, a senior student stared at Xiao Lin and asked if he was the guy who had fainted after the first class yesterday, alarming the student council president. Xiao Lin awkwardly lowered his eyes and admitted it was him. At the same time, he wondered with shame if news of his disgrace had already spread throughout the academy. The senior sighed and remarked that he was simply unlucky. She added that Chun-Na had a harsh reputation and was clearly not someone anyone wanted to deal with. While they were eating, Xiao Lin wondered if only teachers could open the holographic simulation arena. The senior looked at him in surprise and asked if he hadn't checked his credentials as class president yet. An interface immediately appeared, listing his privileges as class president. Things like viewing basic information about classmates, managing group access rights, and approving requests to use the holographic simulation arena. The senior explained that since he was the class monitor, he could submit the application himself without needing anyone's approval. Following her words, Xiao Lin opened his holographic device and found the application in the Accessibility tab. The senior warned him that since he was only a freshman, his request would likely be rejected. But almost immediately after he sent it, a notification sounded. Xiao calmly announced that everything had already been approved. The senior choked on her drink. She stared at him, disbelieving her eyes. The instant approval seemed unheard of, considering even their previous headman had waited 3 weeks for any kind of response. She warned that the arena was open to second-year students, and access cost 500 points. If they failed, they would be lost, and would only return if they won. Xiao Lin focused on his screen, knowing he only had 800 exchange points left. He couldn't make a single mistake. Then he considered what lay ahead. The top 3 students in the upcoming comprehensive exam would receive early qualification for departure to the new world. He remembered his rivals. The man with the scar who claimed that the position of headman would be reassigned after the exam. He also knew that the strongest group in the 7th grade was led by Gu Xiaoya and Wang Dalin. If Wang Dalin became the class monitor, he would never allow Xiao Lin into the arena again. Putting all these thoughts together, Xiao Lin made a final decision. Before the exam began, he needed to become stronger, no matter the cost. Xiao Lin rose from the cafeteria table and told the senior that he was heading to class. She gave him a small wave and said goodbye, watching him go. She noted to herself that he had indeed made a tremendous effort. The scene shifted to a physical education classroom. Inside the gym, 3 students were walking together. Liang Ziwei, a 6th-grade freshman, adjusted his glasses and said he couldn't believe someone with such poor credentials had been chosen as acting class monitor. He wondered out loud if the instructor had gone crazy. Just then, a water bottle crumpled in someone's hand with a loud crack. Wang Dalin crushed it in his hand. After discovering that the instructors were ordinary freshmen and repeaters, he called them losers and deemed their choice of Xiao Lin logical. He noted with displeasure that Xiao Lin was training alone and had a high opinion of herself. Wang Dalin added that Gu Xiaoya was also looking down on her and promised to deal with her. Liang Ziwei came closer and suggested dealing with Xiao Lin right away, without waiting for the official assessment in 3 months. Dalin, surprised, asked what he meant. Liang Ziwei grinned, mentioning a second-year friend on the discipline committee. Reminding him that violations would result in a loss of points, he leaned over and quietly outlined his plan. Meanwhile, Xiao Lin was running diligently on the treadmill in the gym, alone. System notifications kept popping up as he strained himself to the limit. Finally, he stopped, breathing heavily, his face covered in sweat, and looked at the time, noting that it was already almost 7 o'clock. He estimated it was a 10-minute walk to the dorm, just before curfew. As he headed for the exit, he believed that, with this kind of training, he'd be level 2 by next week. He reached for the door handle and tried to turn it, but it didn't budge. He froze, letting out a quiet, surprised, "Oh," and tried again. Then it dawned on him that the door wouldn't open. Looking at it more closely, he realized what was wrong. It had been locked from the outside. Sharp clicking sounds echoed inside the training ground as Xiao Lin tugged at the door handle repeatedly. After several attempts, he realized the door had been locked from the outside. He concluded that the culprit hadn't even bothered to check if anyone was still inside. Curfew was rapidly approaching, and he began to think that he might actually have to spend the entire night in the gym. Then there was another click, and the lights immediately went out. The entire room was plunged into darkness and silence. Xiao Lin let out a short, nervous laugh and reassured himself that it was just a scheduled power outage. However, he couldn't help but complain to himself that this school didn't look like a place where the electricity had to be turned off at night. Outside, under a thin crescent moon, 2 students in dress uniform walked across the academy grounds. Second-year student Han Sun from the disciplinary committee reported that Liang Ziwei had confirmed a violation of the rules. The first-year class leader had been out after curfew. Chen Yu, a first-grade student, firmly stated that the class monitor's disregard for curfew required strict measures to discourage the class. The committee was responsible for maintaining order while the leadership was away. As the first-year supervisor, he emphasized that he would not tolerate lax discipline. Han Sun nodded in agreement, calling his interlocutor Brother Yu. When they arrived at the training ground, Han Sun told Chun Yu that he would go in first to check everything. As he walked toward the entrance, a barely noticeable, calculating smile appeared on his face. He figured that since his target had just become acting headman, he should have plenty of exchange points. For Han Sun, this seemed like the perfect chance to profit. He unlocked the door and stepped into the dark gym, but stopped almost immediately, making a quiet, confused sound. He looked around at the silent treadmills and weight machines, wondering where the student had gone. Chen Yu followed him in and asked what was going on. Han Sun replied casually that it seemed to him as if he heard something, as if someone was hiding nearby. Meanwhile, Xiao Lin remained pressed tightly against the wall in the shadows, frozen motionless as the 2 seniors searched the room. Han Sun glanced around the dark hall in confusion, unable to comprehend what was going on. Chen Yu groaned nearby, arms crossed, reminding him that the door was locked. He assumed he'd misheard. Han Sun wiped the sweat from his brow and let out a light, nervous laugh, agreeing that it was entirely possible. He then suggested they keep searching. As they both turned to leave, Han Sun's face twisted in irritation, and he mentally wondered where that kid had gone. In the background, Xiao Lin slipped out unnoticed, blending into the darkness. Once outside, Xiao Lin quickly went behind a tree and slowly exhaled, as he was so close to failure. If they'd found him, he'd definitely lose his glasses. First-year students aren't allowed outside at night. He crouched down and began to frantically run everything through his head. The timing seemed suspicious. He was locked inside the training ground, and immediately after that, the disciplinary committee showed up at the same place. It seemed too timely. He wondered if someone had set him up, or if he was just overthinking it. The boy tilted his head up to the night sky and froze. Above him hung not one, but two moons. Remembering the instructor's words about the academy's similarities to the ordinary world, he realized that two moons were shining in the new sky. The sight was strange, yet captivating. Since returning to the site was impossible, Xiao Lin retreated into the moonlit forest. He decided the most important thing now was to find a safe place and wait until morning. Then, without warning, a huge silhouette appeared ahead. The dark mouth released a thick cloud of smoke. The main character tensed up, and against the backdrop of the scales, a giant purple eye slowly opened. Xiao Lin froze in place as a giant purple dragon came into view. He recognized it immediately. It was the same dragon from the entrance ceremony. The creature began to move, spreading its large wings with great force, and it rose up, towering above him, and stared straight at Xiao Lin with its glowing eyes. Xiao Lin ran with all his might, rushing forward and mentally ordering himself not to stop. He glanced back, sweat pouring down his face, as he hoped the dragon wasn't hot on his heels. He didn't want to become a late supper, so he raced through the dark forest without slowing down. He noticed a building ahead and instantly decided to head towards it. If he had managed to get inside, he might have been able to hide. He slipped through the wooden gate and finally slowed down. Giving himself a second to catch his breath, he decided to himself that he was safe now. The dragon would never pursue him in such a place. As soon as his breathing evened out, he began to look around, trying to understand where he had ended up. The place resembled a garden, but everything around it seemed unusual. The plants were enormous and bizarre. Right next to him grew a head of cabbage, so gigantic that it towered over him, making him wonder if it could even be called a cabbage anymore. As he ventured deeper, he spotted a bush laden with glowing red fruits. A sweet aroma filled the air, and he found himself wondering if they were edible. Then his attention turned to a large black bird nearby, similar to a rooster. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but imagine a delicious, perfectly baked chicken, golden brown. The image even made his mouth water. The bird suddenly let out a sharp cluck, its eye flashing a faint red light as it stared straight at him. Without warning, it soared into the air and charged straight at him. Xiao Lin quickly jumped aside as the bird opened its beak and spewed a massive stream of flame. He froze in shock, barely dodging the fire and wondering how the chicken was even capable of such a thing. Just as the bird was flying past, someone's hand suddenly shot forward and grabbed it tightly by the neck, right in the air, instantly cutting off the noise. Catching his breath, Xiao Lin looked up. The man in white caught the bird and calmly asked Xiao Lin who he was, what class he was from, why he was breaking curfew, and why he had sneaked into the yard to hunt his chickens. That night, Xiao Lin found himself face to face with a strange man casually holding a black chicken. This awkward situation ultimately changed his perception of the academy. Still catching his breath from his recent run, Xiao Lin took a cautious step back and asked who that guy was. The man introduced himself as Song Junlang, casually stating that he was the Minister of Logistics. Although the appearance of a first year on his territory at night should have been a problem, his unkempt yukata was completely inappropriate for the position. Song Junlang looked at Xiao Lin mockingly and remarked that it was quite impressive to break the academy's rules just 2 days after entering. Xiao Lin quickly waved his hands and explained that he hadn't intended to do anything wrong. He said he was simply running away from the giant dragon outside. Then he started describing everything. How he was locked inside the training hall, as if everything had been planned perfectly. How the men from the disciplinary department were tracking him like hunters cornering their prey. And finally, right behind him, a huge purple dragon appeared, breathing fire. After listening to him, Song Junlang gave a short laugh and called the creature an ordinary large lizard. He added that it wouldn't even bother with something so weak. These words touched him. Xiao Lin froze, trying to comprehend what he heard. And then everything began to make sense. The so-called dragon wasn't real. It was just part of a trap. Song Junlang explained that this was a ploy by the disciplinary department to bully newcomers. In such places, those in power like to create problems because it's easier to control people. As Xiao Lin listened, he gradually realized how deep this setup was. The real purpose of all this was something called reward points. Song Junlang explained that reward points were practically everything in this place. They determined what equipment could be obtained, what resources could be used, and even provided access to special training areas. Weapons, healing items, simulations, absolutely everything cost a ton of points. and the discipline department liked to use traps like these to force students to break the rules, just so they would have to spend their points on fines. And it wasn't just about money. Points also determined promotions and who would gain access to the next stage, something every student in this place coveted. With a knowing smile, Song Junlang suggested that Xiao Lin, instead of losing all his points for breaking the rules, simply pay a small fine. Xiao Lin gritted his teeth, already completely convinced that Wang Dalin had conspired with the disciplinary department to frame him. At this moment, Song Junlang's expression changed. He walked closer and began listing all of Xiao Lin's misdeeds. Staying outside after curfew and entering the logistics department without permission, the mere mention of these two offenses was enough to completely wipe out Xiao Lin's remaining points. The sound of rapid footsteps coming from behind the gate suddenly broke the silence. The patrol squad arrived. The calm Song Junlang offered Xiao Lin a choice: surrender and suffer punishment for his violations, or remain under his protection for the sake of a deal, exchanging freedom for safety. Xiao Lin quickly realized that this guy was far from simple. He was clearly exploiting the situation to gain some kind of advantage. Seeing this reaction, Song Junlang smiled with satisfaction, and then suddenly asked something completely inappropriate. He asked if Xiao Lin could cook. MC just stood there, confused. A second ago, it was about getting out of trouble, and now it was about cooking? His thoughts became jumbled as he tried to keep up. He remembered all those times he'd lazily watched cooking videos while munching on delicious treats, but doing it himself? That was a whole different matter. Song Junlang then explained his condition. He promised to deal with the people outside, but in exchange, Xiao Lin had to do him a small favor. He had been wanting to try the beggar's chicken for a long time, but the blackbird in his hand didn't seem to be too thrilled about the idea. Xiao Lin hesitated and asked if he really needed to prepare it right now. Song Junlang calmly outlined the options again. Go outside, lose points and be punished, or stay, cook food, and have all your violations completely annulled. Thinking about the glasses he had worked so hard for, Xiao Lin clicked his tongue and agreed. Song Junlang narrowed his eyes and smiled smugly, indicating that this was Xiao Lin's own decision. Xiao Lin forced out a weak, awkward smile, hoping he wouldn't ruin things too much. Song Junlang pointed towards the house and told him to go inside and sit quietly no matter what. Xiao Lin hurried away, but still did not forget to thank the person who had both helped him and dragged him into this situation. Outside the gate, Chen Yu and his group were already waiting, holding themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to enforcing the rules. Song Junlang came out to greet them, speaking in a relaxed but clearly dismissive tone as he greeted Chen Yu from the disciplinary department. Chen Yu adjusted his glasses and coldly explained that the director's pet was acting strange, so they needed to inspect the garden immediately. By then, the black chicken in Song Junlang's hand had become completely silent. Song Junlang curled his lips slightly and asked if they had any real reason for this inspection. The discreet exchange revealed a clear clash between the two sides. Standing right at the gate, blocking the way, he mocked the disciplinary department for sticking their noses into other people's business and failing to fulfill their duties. One of the team members snapped back, stating that the logistics department was still under the academy's control, and they had every right to patrol and prevent violations anywhere on campus. Song Junlang's gaze turned cold. He bluntly called Chen Yu a petty lackey and ordered him not to interfere. He then added that if they continued to insist, he would report their unauthorized entry into the logistics department directly to the director. Chen Yu became visibly angry and said that Song Junlang was simply using the director's name to pressure people. He went even further, openly mocking him and claiming that everyone knew his strength wasn't even C rank, and that he only got his position through connections. From behind the bushes, Xiao Lin watched the scene, surprised by how openly Chen Yu displayed his hostility. He kept his gaze fixed on Song Junlang's back, and a vague suspicion began to form in him about who this strange man really was. Chen Yu and Song Junlang continued to stand opposite each other at the gate. He wondered if the two of them were really going to fight right there on the spot. Song Junlang only smiled slightly, mockingly. He casually remarked that if Chen Yu already knew about his connections and still came looking for trouble, then perhaps he wasn't as smart as he thought. Han Sun stood up for his boss, declaring that being close to the director did not give him the right to break the rules, and that no one had the right to challenge the patrol's legal authority. Just when the situation was getting tense, a call came from the student council president. Chen Yu's expression changed slightly as he quickly answered the call. A holographic projection of the student council president appeared. With a serious expression, he asked Chen Yu point-blank if he was causing problems in the logistics department. Chen Yu hastily explained that he was merely checking for suspicious traces, but the president coldly ordered him to return immediately and stop pestering Minister Song. Chen Yu looked furious. He clearly hated wasting such a rare chance to embarrass Song Junlong. Han Sun immediately protested, blaming the president's bias. He insisted the new student could still be lurking nearby, so there was no point in leaving right now. Hearing this, the student council president's expression grew even more somber. He took the time to remind everyone that not only the principal, but the entire academy was deeply indebted to Song Junlong. He added that as long as Song Junlong's actions do not harm the academy's core interests, no one has the right to interfere. Hearing this, Chen Yu could only snort in irritation. Even Han Sun looked confused, unable to understand why his captain had retreated so quickly. Before leaving, Chen Yu still issued a warning. Turning back, he told Minister Sun to handle matters more carefully. Song Junlong simply smiled triumphantly and casually advised Chen Yu to be more careful with his own work. When the group finally left, Xiao Lin emerged from hiding. He apologized for the inconvenience and admitted he was intrigued. He couldn't believe the director himself owed Song Junlong such a huge favor. Song Junlong told him not to worry about it, explaining that he and Chen Yu had been feuding for a long time, and that this night was just another excuse for his rival to stir up a scandal. Unwilling to discuss academy politics, Song Junlong excitedly tempted Xiao Lin to cook clay-baked chicken. He agreed, though he doubted it would be tasty. He also asked about the reasons for his love of the dish. Song Junlong laughed and replied that he was happy just because someone was cooking it for him. The two of them started preparing the ingredients together and wrapped the chicken, immediately in several layers of leaves before covering it all with clay and earth. As the night grew quieter, the fire glowed with a warm reddish glow, illuminating part of the garden. Sitting by the fire with hot tea in his hands, Xiao Lin finally began to relax. This was the first moment of peace he had experienced since arriving at this strange academy. After 2 hours, the hardened clay began to crack, and a rich aroma filled the air. Xiao Lin breathed a sigh of relief. It was his first time making something like this, but somehow it really did turn out perfectly. He even began to feel a little proud of himself, thinking that he could make an excellent cook. Looking at the golden chicken, Song Junlong praised it and remarked that the smell alone could awaken a ravenous appetite in anyone. He generously cut off a large piece and handed it to Xiao Lin first. But when Xiao Lin hesitated after that, he also wondered why Song Junlong didn't take the first bite himself. Song Junlong smiled and explained that elders shouldn't compete with younger ones for food. He said the first piece should always go to the cook. Xiao Lin accepted this explanation without further thought. So he let go of his restraint and took a huge bite. The moment he tasted it, his eyes widened slightly. The chicken was incredibly tender, and the flavor was much better than he expected. Watching him eat with such enthusiasm, Song Junlong casually asked if Xiao Lin had noticed any unusual reaction in his body. Xiao Lin looked puzzled and replied that one piece of chicken shouldn't do much. But almost immediately after these words, a strong pain spread through his body. Xiao Lin instantly doubled over, clutching his stomach as a burning sensation erupted within him. It felt like fire was spreading through his body. While Xiao Lin was writhing in pain, Song Junlong calmly watched him from the sidelines. He even asked if it hurt much, and whether Xiao Lin felt anything other than pain, telling him to endure it a little longer. At that moment, Xiao Lin realized he had been fooled. There was definitely something wrong with this chicken. That's why Song Junlong himself didn't touch the first piece. Sweat poured down Xiao Lin's body, and his vision began to blur. Just when he felt like he was about to lose consciousness, a blazing golden energy suddenly enveloped his entire body. The pain spread through his blood, through his muscles, through every fiber of his being. The veins in his neck bulged, and the burning sensation grew even more intense. Finally, Xiao Lin couldn't hold back any longer and let out a desperate cry. His body seemed to be overflowing with energy. Through the unbearable pain, Xiao Lin felt a strange, unfamiliar force rising from the depths of his being, which began to seethe violently within his body. Meanwhile, Song Junlong calmly took out the notebook on page Hybrid Iron-Crested Chicken number 3 and wrote down the data on gene activation and physical enhancement, muttering quietly to himself. After a series of crosses, the rejection reaction remained too strong. He concluded that the formula clearly needed further refinement. Under the clear blue sky, the huge brick building of the academy towered, looking impressive and majestic. The logistics office was in complete chaos. Books were stacked everywhere, papers covered every desk, and the entire room looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. Xiao Lin slowly woke up in bed with a painful groan. His head felt incredibly heavy and spinning, causing him to rub his forehead in frustration. Song Junlang, wearing a white robe, walked in with a tray of steaming golden food and cheerfully greeted Xiao Lin, who had finally woken up. Upon seeing him, Xiao Lin lost his temper. He sat up in bed and furiously accused Song Junlang of deceiving him and using him as a test subject for dangerous experiments. Song Junlang smiled and pleaded with them not to panic, assuring them that he'd checked everything himself and there was no danger. Xiao Lin countered that he'd nearly died of pain just for the sake of a little lunch. Song Junlang merely laughed and dismissed the matter, pointing out that Xiao Lin was obviously still alive and perfectly fine. He then leaned closer with a mysterious smile and suggested that Xiao Lin, instead of getting angry, should check his stat panel first. Song Junlang continued to insist, asking him to believe him this time, because he would definitely be surprised. After a moment of silence, Xiao Lin finally sighed and gave in. Crossing his arms over his chest, he activated his holographic interface. Xiao Lin chuckled softly as he looked at the numbers. But upon closer inspection, his face instantly changed from shock. Strength +1, physique +2. Physical attack rating increased from F- to F. Xiao Lin stared at his own hand before looking back at the glowing panel, quietly asking himself how this was even possible. His basic physical training skill also rose to level 3, which means he jumped 2 levels at once. While Xiao Lin was still processing what had happened, Song Junlang sat nearby, quickly writing notes in his notebook with an expression of absolute delight on his face. He let out a loud laugh as he celebrated that the experiment had actually been a success. Xiao Lin stated that as a test subject, he had the right to know the truth, and asked directly whether the increase in characteristics was really due to the chicken. Song Junlang immediately nodded and invited him to sit comfortably so they could talk. He explained that the dish was called a hybrid Iron Crest chicken, a breed he had developed by crossing a common chicken with a New World creature called an Iron Crest bird. Leaning forward, Song Junlang suddenly asked Xiao Lin if he had ever read novels about time travelers. When Xiao Lin answered in the affirmative, Song Junlang outlined a scenario for him. He asked how long a primitive man would survive if he suddenly found himself in a modern metropolis. Xiao Lin quickly understood what he was getting at. He explained that someone from a primitive era wouldn't have had an immune system necessary for the modern world, and would probably quickly die from unfamiliar diseases and bacteria. Song Junlang confirmed this, explaining that Norma and the Blue Planet were different worlds, and the bodies of ordinary people simply could not naturally adapt to the new environment. That's why freshmen are barred from entering the new world. Xiao Lin understood why the student council president had argued so heatedly with the principal about admitting students early. Song Junlang admitted that he came up with the idea of using creatures from the new world to help students develop the necessary resistance more quickly. At first, he tried to directly consume creatures from Norma, but the rejection reaction was too strong. This didn't improve his stats, but rather nearly made him ill. Xiao Lin noted with embarrassment that Song Junlang was alarming with his willingness to experiment on himself. After his failures, Song Junlang began reducing the rejection rate by crossbreeding. He added, however, that such dietary enhancement only works once, and then it stops working. Xiao Lin nodded understandingly. He noted that if nutrition increased stats indefinitely, the academy wouldn't need physical training anymore. Song Junlang asked Xiao Lin for his opinion, adding that although the iron-crested chicken would no longer work, he had plenty of other hybrids to test. Xiao Lin gave him a penetrating look. Behind all these explanations was Song Junlang's banal desire to find a free volunteer for future experiments. Song Junlang responded with a carefree laugh. In the end, Xiao Lin agreed to help, but only on one condition. None of the experiments could endanger his life. Song Junlang told him not to worry. After this, Xiao Lin decided it was time to return to class. But before leaving, he casually asked how long he'd been unconscious. Song Junlang raised 2 fingers. 2 days had passed. Xiao Lin cried out in shock. 2 full days. He'd been instantly worried that his missed classes had already sent his credit scores into the red. Song Junlang told him to relax. He reminded him of his connections at the very top and explained that his release from classes had already been approved. From now on, even late-night strolls through the logistics department would no longer be a problem. At these words, Xiao Lin finally relaxed and admitted that this was good news. As he left, Song Junlang cheerfully waved goodbye to him and reminded him to come back that evening. Later, in the academy cafeteria, Gu Xiaoya quietly ate her meal, while the students sitting nearby argued loudly. Wang Dalin complained in frustration about how absurd the whole situation around Xiao Lin had become. Han Sun asked if he was still upset about it, mentioning that they had already received a severe reprimand because of what happened. Wang Dalin slammed the table and was angry because Xiao Lin had escaped the trap for 2 days, avoided the fine, and become close to Minister Song. Hearing this conversation, Gu Xiaoya froze silently. She realized that she had indeed not seen Xiao Lin for the past 2 days. Then she suddenly noticed someone standing nearby. She looked up and saw Xiao Lin, who was again dressed in the academy uniform, and casually waved his hand in greeting. Gu Xiaoya looked at him seriously and immediately asked what exactly he had been doing for the past 2 days. Gu Xiaoya asked again, seriously, where Xiao Lin had been for 2 days. He smiled wearily, replied that it was a long story, and promised to tell her everything later. Wang Daowen's voice interrupted them. He stood nearby, mocking and surprised, loudly asking how Xiao Lin had the nerve to show up here. Wang Daowen approached and sarcastically called Xiao Lin an all-powerful class president. He added that he thought he'd been expelled for truancy, but his neighbor quietly asked him not to make a scene. Wang Daowen ignored the advice and continued to mock Xiao Lin, calling him trash who couldn't be helped by training. He added that no amount of support could compensate for the difference in strength. Xiao Lin didn't even look up. He picked at his ear and replied dryly and sarcastically that Wang Daowen sounded very impressive and that he should definitely keep it up. This reaction immediately angered Wang Daowen even more. He demanded to know what kind of attitude this was. Wang Daowen warned Xiao Lin not to get carried away by his connections with Song Junlang, saying that in the academy, only strength mattered. Before leaving, Wang Daowen gave one last warning. Xiao Lin had better enjoy the moment because during the exam he would personally show him the huge gap in their strength. As Wang Daowen walked away, Xiao Lin watched him with a puzzled look, quietly noticing that this guy was out of his mind. Gu Xiaoya, who had remained calm the entire time, then asked Xiao Lin if he had seen the academy's latest announcement. Xiao Lin asked what she meant, and Gu Xiaoya raised her finger, explaining that the schedule for the first comprehensive exam had changed. The boy was surprised by the exam rescheduling. Gu Xiaoya confirmed that the deadline had been reduced from 3 months to a month and a half, and now there was very little time left. The news hit Xiao Lin hard. He looked down, thinking feverishly. Time had been cut in half, and making progress in that time now seemed much more difficult. Remembering he'd missed the basic meditation, Xiao Lin felt a sharp sense of unease. He needed to catch up immediately, otherwise, not only would he be in the top 3, but even passing the exam would be in jeopardy. Xiao Lin hurried to meditate, but his path was blocked by Li Ma Ling, a third-year student who was serving as a substitute teacher. She was small, wearing a huge purple robe and a large hat. Li Meiling glared at Xiao Lin and asked if it was him. Without waiting for an answer, she scolded him for disrupting the fencing lesson and making such impudent demands on Cheng Na, a senior. Xiao Lin was flustered and, sweating nervously, dismissed the whole thing as a misunderstanding. He assured her he hadn't offended Cheng Na. She had suggested the test herself, and he had managed it entirely on his own. Li Meiling rudely cut him off, shouting that this was complete nonsense. Her loud scream echoed throughout the classroom and terrified everyone nearby. The girl accused him of lying. She knew that Xiao Lin had chosen the path of magic and the sword against Cheng Na's advice, and then used the council president to force her to yield. Li Meiling added that she wouldn't have let him into the classroom if Cheng Na hadn't personally stood up for him. Under the onslaught of her frenzied energy, Xiao Lin could only nod weakly. As class began, Li Ma Ling walked forward, continuing to mutter complaints about the arrogant freshmen who were unable to understand Cheng Na's good intentions. She revealed the reason for such care. According to Li Ma Ling, Cheng Na once mentored another junior who was an exact copy of Xiao Lin. This student also stubbornly insisted on mastering magic and martial arts simultaneously, despite repeated warnings. But it all ended tragically. During his first real encounter in the new world, his magic and sword skills proved too crude, and he was ultimately beaten to death by the local alien race. The body sent back later barely resembled a human being at all. That incident became something Cheng Na could never forget. Li Meiling explained that Cheng Na still blames herself for not stopping the guy back then, and now reacts very painfully when she sees someone else making the same mistake. After finishing her story, Li Meiling told Xiao Lin that he didn't understand anything at all. Xiao Lin remained silent for a while, as the meaning of everything he had heard slowly sank in. The boy finally realized that Cheng Na hadn't opposed his choice out of arrogance. She simply, sincerely didn't want another student to die in the same way. After a moment, Xiao Lin looked calmly at Li Meiling and replied that he now understood everything. He assured her that she need not worry, as he had no intention of repeating that tragedy. Instead, he firmly explained that he was doing all this solely to survive in the new world. Li Meiling stared at him silently through her glasses for several seconds. Snorting, she remarked that it was easier said than done. She wouldn't repeat what she'd missed in 2 days, and Xiao Lin would have to figure it all out on his own. Xiao Lin ended up walking through the meditation class, passing other students. Gu Xiaoya, who was sitting on her cushion among the rows of students, raised her hand and gave him a sign. She called him over to her. Xiao Lin looked at where she was sitting with surprise. Gu Xiaoya handed him a notebook and explained that it was her notes from the last 2 days of classes. Xiao Lin thanked her and took the notebook. Then the main character sat quietly with an open textbook in front of him, studying the basics of the theory of magic. The magical system was built on wind, fire, water, and earth. Powerful mages controlled them, combining the elements like programming code to create spells. Meditation was the foundation of everything. The goal was to sense the elementary particles floating in the air, establish a connection with them, and, over time, learn to control them. After reading for a while, Xiao Lin closed his eyes and assumed a meditative posture, trying to concentrate completely. However, after a few minutes, sweat slowly began to appear on his forehead. Something felt wrong. No matter how hard he concentrated, he couldn't feel anything at all. The more he tried, the more frustrated he became. That night, Xiao Lin was helping Song Junlong carry baskets of giant vegetables. He casually tossed a glowing lemon and asked if he was having trouble meditating yet. Hearing this, Xiao Lin immediately looked at him with hope and asked if Song Junlong had any food that could also improve elemental perception. Song Junlong looked at him in confusion and asked if Xiao Lin really thought he was Doraemon. He reassured me that this was normal. The hardest part of meditation is taking the first step. You can go from level 1 to 50 in a couple of weeks, but sometimes it takes a month or 2 to earn your first experience point. Xiao Lin immediately complained that he didn't have that much time. The first assessment was just over a month away, and he needed to improve all aspects of his strength. After some thought, Song Junlong suggested asking the mages for advice. He explained that perception of the elements depends on one's intelligence. The higher one's intelligence, the easier it is to overcome the first barrier, an attribute of intelligence. Xiao Lin quietly repeated these words, his thoughts racing. And then, something suddenly clicked. As class president, he had the right to see the basic attributes of his classmates. And in terms of intelligence, there was one person among them who significantly surpassed all the others. Xiao Lin immediately waved his hand through the air and opened the holographic system interface. But as soon as the data loaded, his expression changed completely. His gaze became fixed on one specific area of the screen. Xiao Lin stood silently, staring at the numbers in utter shock. Gu Xiaoya had an incredibly high IQ, but according to the system's data, she only had 2 years to live. The scene changed. Xiao Lin walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the space. As he approached the meditation room, the boy pushed open the large wooden doors and entered the quiet hall, where Gu Xiaoya was already sitting on the floor cushion. And as soon as she noticed the guy, she happily waved to him, greeting him. Xiao Lin sat down right next to her. But the atmosphere was far from easy. He got straight to the point. Looking her in the eye, he reminded her that, as class president, he had the right to see student profiles. This access included information about their life expectancy. He paused, sensing the tension, and mentioned that he'd seen her natural lifespan. He asked if she really only had 2 years left. The words escaped his lips, and Xiao Lin panicked, his face twisted in realization of his folly. He realized he was sticking his nose into something that wasn't his business. Gu Xiaoya looked at him through her glasses for a long time in silence. Finally, she simply replied that it was so. But Xiao Lin did not back down and leaned forward. The girl, in turn, asked what had happened and why he had suddenly raised this topic. He wondered if she was suffering from a serious or incurable disease. He had already practically violated her personal space and added that they had been through life and death together, and so he could help her come up with something. The girl looked momentarily stunned by his outburst, but she quickly regained her composure. She explained that it wasn't a serious or incurable illness, but simply a congenital condition she'd lived with since childhood.
At that moment, all the pieces of the puzzle finally came together in his head.
He noticed that he now understood why she had shown such keen interest when Qin mentioned the possibility of increasing life expectancy at this school. She confirmed his suspicions.
She reminded them that those who fail the test have their memories erased and are returned to Earth. For others, it's a trivial matter, but for her, returning means only 2 years of life without a chance to change anything.
She looked at him with a rare, gentle smile and thanked him for his help. Thanks to him, she was able to stay here and grasp her only chance at life.
Embarrassed, Xiao Lin looked away and rubbed the back of his head. He replied that there was nothing to be thanked for, as they simply wanted to maximize the reward and reap mutual benefits.
Turning around, he assured her that she could always count on his help, since they'd passed the exam together. He already considered her a friend, and Gu Xiaoya nodded slightly in response. Suddenly, the doors burst open again with a bang, and the teacher burst into the room. She wasn't happy to be there, grumbling that she had to teach brats again. Had she known this before, she would never have taken the bait for a couple of points to become a substitute teacher.
She stopped abruptly, noticing that the room wasn't empty. Her gaze fell on 2 students sitting side by side at the end of the hall. She noted that they had both arrived remarkably on time, and she added that they could even be commended for that. Xiao Lin instantly switched to model student mode and, smiling ingratiatingly, thanked her. But Li Maling continued to be indignant. Pointing her finger at him, she shouted that he still hadn't mastered perception during the last meditation. If he was stuck now, he could get the hell out of there and go back to fencing. Xiao Lin smiled politely and nodded, but he was mentally criticizing her. This petite and cute-looking elder had an incredibly explosive temper. While the rest of the class took their seats, Xiao Lin closed his eyes and tried to concentrate.
Large beads of sweat rolled down his face as he struggled to feel anything.
But, as expected, it ended in complete failure. Just like last time, I still couldn't detect a single particle of the elements.
He realized that conventional methods wouldn't work with his characteristics, so he had only one final trump card left.
His eyes snapped open, blazing with a determined glint, and a dark, swirling aura began to rise from his body. It was time to cheat. Or rather, to use his unique talent. Xiao Lin began scanning the room like a magical radar. Looking at the students, Xiao Lin saw a blue system window with a notification that the basic meditation level 1 skill had been discovered and was now available for copy.
Xiao Lin soon noticed that most of the class was still stuck on level 0, and only a handful of students had managed to crawl up to level 1.
His gaze soon fell on Gu Xiaoye, the class's resident genius. She sat quietly in her seat, a bright golden aura flickering around her body. Without wasting any time, he immediately selected the skill copy. The system responded immediately. A basic level 6 meditation lasting 3 minutes. After activating the skill, Xiao Lin saw another world. Streams of red and blue energy swirled in the air around him, shimmering in a mesmerizing dance. Observing the countless energy currents around him, Xiao Lin finally understood how exactly the mages saw this world.
While Xiao Lin was concentrating on mastering the elements, the substitute teacher sat at the front of the class with a completely bored look. The bored older sister slumped at the table, her chin propped up. She found the lesson unbearably boring, and she longed to leave early so she could play with Nana instead.
Lost in thought, the teacher idly watched the class, unaware of the skills being stolen. She had already concluded that Gu Xiaoya was the only one who showed any real promise. The rest, in her opinion, were completely unimpressive. But suddenly something caught her attention. Surprise appeared on her face.
Soon her gaze shifted to Xiao Lin. The elemental energy in the classroom was behaving strangely. Instead of floating aimlessly, it was gradually beginning to condense around him.
The teacher watched in confusion as the energy rushed toward Xiao Lin. She couldn't understand how a novice with an IQ of 2 could elicit such a powerful response.
Meanwhile, Xiao Lin himself remained completely immersed in meditation. A sharp ringing sound rang in his head. Skill unlocked. Basic meditation. Xiao Lin smiled with satisfaction. The method had worked. He recalled Song's words about how the first successful sensation of elemental energy immediately unlocks the skill of basic meditation. But just when Xiao Lin was enjoying his success, teacher called him out, calling him a little brat. The disgruntled teacher pointed a finger at him. He hadn't sensed the elements yesterday, and today he'd caused an energetic disturbance.
Narrowing her eyes, she demanded an honest explanation of what exactly he'd done overnight. Li Meiling decided not to even try to deal with this issue directly in the classroom. She unceremoniously grabbed Xiao Lin's wrist and dragged him away under the watchful eyes of Gu Xiaoyi and the rest of the class. As she walked, she opened the SmartBrains interface and brought up his student information on the screen. The data confirmed that Xiao Lin had indeed unlocked the basic meditation. Li Meiling immediately began interrogating him. Coming closer, she demanded that he stop clowning around and tell her the whole truth. Xiao Lin awkwardly suggested that his sudden insight had been due to his quick learning ability. Li Meiling didn't believe him and demanded that he give her a real answer instead of making her look stupid. Realizing he needed to come up with a better explanation, Xiao Lin claimed he had eaten various strange things that Song Junlang had fed him. He added that one of the fruits he ate may have temporarily heightened his elemental perception. The mention of Song Junlang instantly changed Li Meiling's attitude. After considering what she'd heard, she admitted that the situation seemed much more logical now. She warned Xiao Lin that being a test subject was mortally dangerous and told him to take care of himself. He quickly thanked her for her concern and took the warning to heart. Feeling confident, he asked when the students would officially begin learning spells. Li Meiling flicked him on the forehead and reminded him that with an intelligence of only 2 units, it was still too early for him to start learning spells. She explained that meditation was just a threshold, and that casting spells required a high level of intelligence, which Xiao Lin clearly did not have at the moment. Given his position, mastering magic in his first year was simply unrealistic. After hearing this, Xiao Lin could only accept the answer. He understood that his low intelligence was his vulnerability. Copying was useful, but the skill's 7-day cooldown prevented him from relying on it constantly. For this reason, he seriously considered whether he should place even more emphasis on studying physical self-improvement. Li Meiling recalled Cheng Na's words. Seeing Xiao Lin's low stats, she understood his struggles. The rigorous exam forced him to do everything he could to survive. Li Meiling stood with her arms crossed and continued lecturing Xiao Lin. She claimed that she was guiding him on the right path only out of the kindness of her heart, while most people would not even bother with a newbie. She then asked him if he remembered how the other students used staffs to attack during the entrance exam. This question instantly brought back memories of those events in Xiao Lin's mind. He recalled how, during the test, he'd obtained a staff and activated an energy blast, even though he'd never learned any spells. Li Meiling raised her staff with the blue crystal, and azure energy swirled around her. She explained that the staff facilitates control over the elements and heightens their perception. She added that the newcomers' examination staffs were pre-enchanted with a basic explosion. Anyone could activate this built-in skill as long as their intelligence wasn't 0. Li Meiling pointed to her staff and mentioned the academy shopping area. They sold beginner staffs with built-in skills, and Xiao Lin could find one that suited him. Hearing this, Xiao Lin enthusiastically thanked her for the advice. Li Meiling immediately warned him not to get his hopes up. Holding out her staff, she warned that the trading area was full of defective goods that could explode. She told them to choose wisely, lest Xiao Lin be deceived. With a wave of her hand, she extinguished the glow of the staff and warned him against buying expensive things. With his intelligence, she added sternly, he needed to develop a foundation, not aim high. Xiao Lin quickly assured her that he understood everything and thanked her again for the warning. As Li Meiling turned and headed towards the massive double doors, she suddenly stopped. Looking back, she reminded him not to show off in the pursuit of power. She sternly emphasized that staying alive was the most important thing in the world. Xiao Lin watched her go and concluded that, although Li Meiling looked fierce and rude, she was actually reliable and kind. Dressed in uniform, Xiao Lin arrived at the trading area and checked his finances among the displays of armor and swords. He noted that he had 800 exchange points. He remembered that the holographic scene required a 500-point deposit. Success would return the deposit, but failure would permanently deduct the points. Looking at the silver sword, he calculated his spending limit. He needed to save points for the simulation, so he only had 300 points left for equipment. During the week of trading, Xiao Lin met the 300-point threshold and ordered 2 starting weapons. The first was a golden beginner staff topped with a glowing blue sphere. The second was a silver dagger with a green gemstone in the guard. It was a beginner's dagger, an improved type. Dressed in dark tactical armor, Xiao Lin stood before the stone simulation arena. He clenched his gloved fist and mentally checked his readiness. His equipment was in place, his skills were ready, and his spirit was unwavering. Looking at the arena ahead, Xiao Lin determinedly prepared for battle and knew the time had come. The blue interface requested confirmation of an E-rank simulation, with a 500-point deposit deducted if the simulation failed.
Xiao Lin clicked the consent button.
A red window popped up, notifying that 7th grade freshman Xiao Lin had activated the arena. The system issued a final warning and told everyone to get ready. Lava was spilling out into the surrounding area.
Xiao Lin continued to concentrate on his surroundings as sparks, embers, and clouds of smoke began to fly around him.
A cave of lava and rocks is formed, trapping the hero on the path. To win, you must reach the finish line or survive 2 hours of monster onslaught.
From the depths of the dark crevice came the growl of a creature, followed by a sharp, hostile squeal. A huge rat-like monster with red eyes emerged from the shadows, its back completely covered in jagged stone spikes.
Clutching his dagger, Xiao Lin walked along the path. He remembered that the platform allowed him to choose the environment and monster difficulty, and he chose E rank. Suddenly, a swarm of spiky rat monsters burst out of the dark tunnel, filling the entire cave with a deafening squeal. Preparing for his first battle, Xiao Lin raised his dagger. A green wind aura enveloped the blade. He decided to test the power of his newly acquired weapon. Xiao Lin made the first move, swinging his rookie dagger and releasing a sharp green energy blade towards the approaching monster. The system instantly displayed the skill description. Wind Blade. This attack cleanly sliced through one of the spiky rat monsters. Without stopping, Xiao Lin attacked. Green crescent-shaped wind slashes tore the rushing monsters into pieces, which quickly vanished into thin air. Standing amidst the streams of magic, Xiao Lin watched the battle. He understood that surviving the deadly exams was only possible through training, becoming stronger.